So, our passage this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14. And to understand what's happening, I want to rewind to a previous passage so that you kind of get the flow of how this whole thing goes. All four Gospels record certain events. They record the name Jesus. They record that he picked out disciples. They record that he had a ministry that started in Galilee and moved to Jerusalem. They record a crucifixion. They record a resurrection. And all four Gospels record the miracle that precedes this event, the feeding of the 5,000. Now, you may have heard the phrase, history never repeats itself, but it often rhymes. Anybody ever heard that said? Okay, so I want to ask you to think historically, just kind of in the life of the Jewish people. Can you remember a time when the following elements kind of came together? The people of God, the wilderness, all of them following one guy who had been sent to them, and everybody ate. Okay? Now, how many of you are imagining Moses in the wilderness and the manna and that sort of thing, right? Most of you are, okay? That's exactly what that's exactly what the crowd would have been thinking. And in my opinion, I'm always going to signpost my opinion. That way you don't take something that's my opinion as, something it shouldn't be. But in my opinion, this is the point where a lot of people in Galilee and the surrounding regions realized this guy isn't just another rabbi. This guy isn't just a blue-collar rabbi who really gets us. He's not the guy that just says the quiet part out loud, or the guy who says stuff that really deeply resonates with all of us, but we can't quite put it into words or can't quite explain why. This is when I think the people in Galilee realized there's something different about that, and different in a good way. Could he be the Messiah? Could he be God? He's certainly acting like it. He's feeding people in the wilderness. Nobody's done that since Moses. So, the tabloids and the rumor mill and all these kinds of things would have been stirred, let's say. And Jesus, being Jesus, he dismisses the crowd. He says, okay, go back to your homes, do good things, love one another, listen to your rabbi, all that kind of stuff. And then he immediately sends his disciples out on the lake, out on the Sea of Galilee, as it's called on the maps. Now, I want to pause for just a second, and I want to ask you, how has that passage, the feeding of the 5,000, been preached in the past? Have you thought about how it's been preached in the past? Now, I'm going to pick at another pastor, covertly here, but the way I've heard it preached in the past is, anybody ever read the story of the stone soup? Right? The idea that, we've got nothing to feed everybody with. I know, I'll put a rock in a pot. And everybody says, well, if you're going to put a rock in, maybe I'll put a carrot in. Well, if you're going to put a carrot in, maybe I'll put some cabbage in. Well, if you're going to put a carrot and some cabbage, maybe I'll put something else in. And the whole community kind of brings what they have, and, You think the people in Jesus' time had ever heard the story of the stone soup? No. Jesus was doing the kinds of things that everybody started to realize, hey, something else is going on here. So, not to pick at other pastors, but to simply say, there's something really big here going on. And the people at the time realized it. So the people leave, the disciples board the boat, Jesus goes off to pray, and the night passes. And the text tells us that very early in the morning, now this probably would have been sometime between 3 and 6 a.m. And anywhere you go in the world, between 3 and 6 a.m., it's very, very dark. is very, very hard to see. It's very hard to see one another. But the other thing that happens here is a storm rolls in very, 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 very quickly. Now, bear in mind that a lot of Jesus' early disciples were fishermen. They'd been on that lake their entire lives. They knew what it was like. They knew it could be dangerous. They knew that going out on the lake could be dangerous. And they had probably also spent enough time on that lake that they'd heard the stories. They'd heard stories about fishermen that went out to fish and never came back. They probably also would have heard some ghost stories. At this time, there was a common belief that if someone were to die, if someone were to fall overboard and drown in the Sea of Galilee, the idea was that the sea was a place where evil had broken forth, and the soul would not have been able to escape the body properly. And so the soul would just hover above the water. And so that, of course, these vague ghost stories would probably, arise, and they'd see something kind of vague out on the water and say, oh, there's Uncle so-and-so, or, there's that ghost, or something like that. I kind of wonder if the same thing happens in the Loch Ness over in Scotland. I don't know. But the point is, they came from a culture, they had experience with the lake. They were out on the lake, there was a very bad storm, and Jesus decides he's just going to go out there and walk on the water. Now, we all come from someplace, and that someplace that we all come from is part of our culture. We all have a culture. Some of it's shared, some of it's disputed, but we all have a culture. And it's that cultural lens that we all have that sometimes focuses and sometimes distorts us. I'll give you an example. When we're all rooting for the same team, we're focused. When we're rooting for different teams, we're distorted. What was happening here is 12 fishermen in a boat are out on the lake in the middle of a storm, and they see Jesus coming toward them, and their culture tells them to be afraid. And Jesus says, don't be afraid. It's me. He's inviting them to see things as they really, truly are. He's inviting them into the ultimate reality that he is God. By the way, this morning in Sunday school, we were talking about water miracles. We were talking about times when Moses divided the Red Sea, or God divided the Red Sea for Moses. We were talking about the time when Joshua and the nation of Israel crossed the Jordan, and all the waters heaped up on one side, and the whole nation passed through on dry ground, just like before, but not quite, right? Because the waters only gathered on one side. The rest of the water was flowing downstream. And then when everybody gets through and the Ark of the Covenant comes out of the middle of the river, the water flows on through at flood stage. There's a miracle story where I believe it's Elisha. One of the guys is working and he swings an axe, and the axe head flies into the river, and he says a prayer and the axe head floats. And they're able to retrieve the axe head. But nowhere, anywhere in the Old Testament does it ever say that anybody could tread upon the water. The only one who could do that was God. And so the disciples are sitting here watching Jesus do this, and their culture tells them that's a ghost and be afraid. I don't know if we give Peter enough credit. But Peter's pretty adventurous at this point. He says, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come meet you on the water. And Jesus says, well, come on then. So Peter climbs out of the boat. He starts to walk toward Jesus. And for a short minute, he's got it. For a short minute, for just a short period of time, He's walking on the water. He's headed toward Jesus. He's out of the boat. And then the passage tells us that, he sees the wind and the waves. And I don't know what happened exactly. I sort of imagine that Jesus was maybe 25, 50 yards away, and Peter had a long way to go, and the wind and the waves kind of blinded him for a moment, and he was overcome with fear and started to sink and cried out, as I imagine I would were I in those same situations. I'm a pretty good swimmer, but I don't want to go swim, 2 miles from the middle of the lake and that's the other thing. That late, or that early in the morning, who knows which way is east or west? You might think land is a mile that way, and it might be 7 miles before you hit land. But the point is, Peter was in the grip of the kind of fear that in order to overcome it, in order to understand it, in order to put it behind him, he had to experience firsthand what it was that Jesus was trying to get him to do. He had to leave his experiences behind. He had to say, okay, this isn't about me. This is about what's ahead of me. And he had to go forward. It's not about us. It's not about our culture. It's not about our fears. It's not about our preferences. It's not about our preconceived ideas. It's not about our experiences that reinforce our ideas, our beliefs, so on and so forth. It's about what's ahead of us. Sometimes we have to experience what things are really like before we can really understand the reality that we're seeing or the reality that we're part of. So, what are some things that we can take away from this particular passage? First off, let's name the fact that the culture we live in, sets us up to fear certain things, fear certain people, fear certain experiences. I read one time that it takes something like 10 positive experiences to overcome one negative experience. Okay? So, in my brain, here's how I took that piece and tried to piecemeal it into something useful for me. If that's the case, then it probably takes 10 positive experiences with someone who follows Jesus to overcome one negative experience with someone who follows Jesus. That means we can't afford negative experiences with people. We can't afford that. Another way to maybe look at that is it probably takes 10 invitations before somebody comes to an event. It might take 10 invites before somebody comes to, a meal or a church service or a Bible study or a small group or whatever. Might take 10 of those. Might take more. I don't know. People are different. But that's an average. The other thing is, let's name the fact that sometimes things look different than the way they actually are. I think about this a lot with my students. I walk into a school that's ethnically diverse. I don't know how many of my students have positive experiences with male teachers, negative experiences with male teachers, or no experience with male teachers. So I'm trying to build positive experiences with my students, but at the same time, I also I have to be genuine to who I am. Think of it this way. Here's a real example. Let's say that I lay a snake right down in the middle of the carpet right here. And all you see are the colors yellow, black, and red. You know where this is going, right? Okay? How many of you are going to lunge forward and say, ooh, I wonder what kind of snake that is? And how many of you are going to hold back a little bit? Most of us are going to hold back a little bit. Or run, yeah. Go get a rake or something, or something like that. But, of course, we're also going to, remind ourselves, red touches black, friendly Jack. Red touches yellow, kill a fellow. That's the difference between a coral snake and a king snake, right? So, point is, it's not about us, it's about the thing. And sometimes we have to experience the thing in order to know what it's really about. So when you look at this story and you read about Peter falling in and crying out and, being upset and being afraid, I hope that you remember that when you go through those times, when you stumble, when you feel like you're sinking, when you feel afraid, when you feel terrified in the third watch of the night between 3 and 6 a.m. or any other time, but that's the most common time it happens to me, and realize that what's really happening here is it's not about us. It's not about what we think or what we're afraid of. It's not about the thing we're afraid of. It's about God in the midst of it. And that's what we're doing. That's what God is doing. Will you all join me in a brief word of prayer? Gracious God, I pray that you will bring your presence in each and every one of our minds and hearts. Remind us today that you're with us. Remind us always that it's not about us. Remind us that you are greater than anything else in this world. Remind us that even the winds, the waves, and the weather answer to you. Remind us that whatever difficulties lay ahead of us, whatever difficulties we are walking through right at this moment, remind us that you're with us and that you will walk with us all the way through this and beyond. Help us to let go of the things we need to let go of. Help us to embrace the things we must embrace. Fill us with joy and love and your peace. These things we ask in your Son, Jesus' name. And all God's children said,